Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Incredible Flora of India, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Faiza Mookerjee. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Take it away, Faiza.
Thank you, Rob. Hello, everyone. I'm Faiza, and I am currently sitting in central India in Kanha National Park. That's where I live most of the year. And I'll be talking about a topic which is quite close to me personally. I really love plants and everything to do with flora. And I enjoy encouraging my guests and encouraging people to look at habitats, while entering any sort of new wildlife destination, to look at the wildlife through the lens of plants. And it is often a topic which is sort of has a really bad reputation and can tend to be boring. And I really enjoy making it as interesting as possible for people. So today we'll be focusing on a couple of very distinct habitats of India. And in fact, all four of them are on our NatHab India trips. So it's a really nice way for you to get to know about some of these trips as well. Except for a change, instead of talking more about, say, the charismatic big mammals and major species, I'll be actually talking more about the plants, and the focus will be on the flora for a change. So I hope you enjoy this. So before we sort of get into the four different habitats, let's talk about the major sort of seasonal occurrence in India, which determines literally most of our habitats, and that is the Indian monsoon. So I'm sure, I mean, a lot of you might already be aware of this, but for those who are, say, new to this, the entire country of India's sort of habitat, vegetation zones, a lot is completely determined by an annual rain cycle that takes place between the months of generally between June and September. So as the landmass of India gets hotter through the summer months, through the months of, say, March, April, May, there's sort of like a low pressure that is created, which pulls basically these winds, which are known as the southwest monsoon winds, from the two oceans on either side, from the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And as these winds sort of get pulled towards the landmass, we have the Himalayas, which are sort of bordering the entire northern boundary of India. The Himalayas sort of create almost like a wall. And once the winds, like the wet moisture-led winds hit the Himalayas, that's where the rain is basically caused. So different parts of the country get variation in rainfall based on their topography, based on their location, how close they are to the sea. And as you can see on the map on the right, there are certain areas which are a lot, the more green areas, which are the wetter parts. And as you can notice, they are close to the coast, so they do get a lot more rain. And if you notice right on top, up in the northern part of India, where it says cold desert, now this region is actually in the rain shadow of the Himalayas, and it's known as the Trans-Himalayan region. And because it is on the other side and doesn't get those monsoon, moisture-led winds, it has turned into a cold desert over time. And instead of getting the monsoon winds, it actually gets the northern cold winds from Central Asia and further, the countries up north. So this will give you a good idea of some of the areas that I'll be talking about and help you sort of understand what determines the vegetation in these areas. So let's get into the first one that I'll be talking about today. So the sal forests of India, one of the most iconic tree species, I would say, of India. And it's I mean, anybody who would walk into a sal forest would understand how magical a space it is. And these trees are unique in the sense that they form pure stands of trees. So There are tree species which you will never see growing independently by themselves. They will always be growing as a forest together. So it's almost nice to think of them as communities of trees to some extent. Interestingly, sal trees are actually part of a family called dipterocarps. And dipterocarps are mostly known to be growing in more sort of rainforested areas. And this, for a change, the sal forests of India are actually found in not so much the rainforest, but more in central India, in slightly drier parts of India for a change. But like all dipterocarps, sal trees also grow very specifically in the sense that they have a straight bole that goes up. They have an aromatic resin. They have very sort of thick, waxy leaves, and they have a flower which has 5 petals, which is very characteristic of most dipterocarp flowers. So this particular forest you will see on the Grand India tour, and because the dominant sort of area where you see them is in Kanha and Bandhavgarh National Park, and you would also see them to some extent in Kaziranga as well. Now, if you can see the map over here on the top left, you can see the distribution of where these trees are found. Now, sunflowers are super fascinating because of how picky they are about where they grow. And they need the perfect combination of a very sort of well drained sandy soil. Um, they need a slightly higher amount of rainfall. And basically, there are certain conditions that have to be met. And because of that, you can notice that they aren't really growing everywhere. They have a very specific niche that they grow in. So these trees, another feature of dipterocarps is that they are excellent timber. And the sal trees, back in the day, starting from, when India was colonized, was a extremely precious resource and used a lot by the British in many ways. So because this wood is extremely good, most of our sleepers were built with sal. And it's also known to be termite resistant. So it kind of made it quite popular to use this wood for that reason. But what is interesting is that the British actually, I mean, since then till now, nobody has actually been able to figure out how to cultivate this as a mature forest. And that makes this tree that much more sort of rare and almost extremely precious. And it is now, it isn't endangered, but it is definitely a punishable offense to cut this tree anywhere in the country. So it's quite interesting. There are people who have tried to grow it, and they have actually succeeded to grow it to a sapling stage, to a slightly larger, but nobody yet has grown an entire forest yet. So some of the interesting sort of parts of the tree and to help you identify sal forest because it's only sal growing there. But the bark has these long sort of almost like something has taken like its claws and passed through the trunk of the tree. So it has these long vertical lines going through. The seeds have these beautiful wings. So they, especially when they're falling, they have like this helicopter-like um, way of flying, which is very pretty in the summer months, especially. The new leaves are a beautiful bright green. And in fact, the first picture of mine, like the cover photo, which has those almost like these lime green colored trees, those are the sal trees. So it's actually quite stunning to see them in their new leaves, which is around the months of April when you see that. And then they're also flowering in the months of March and April. And trust me, it is the most gorgeous sort of aroma that takes over the entire landscape when sun flowers. So it's quite an amazing forest to be in. So sal trees, as so here in the top left photo, of course, the tiger walking through a sal forest, you can see at the back some really massive sal trees and that distinctive sort of lines going through the trees to sort of be able to identify it. But these forests, so sal trees are evergreen, and that is one of the key things that determine this entire ecosystem because although they are evergreen, they are also growing around a forest which is deciduous. So they are literally like that patch of really moist, cool forest where there's a lot of leaf litter, there's a lot of shade. So a lot of the species that you get here are quite well designed and quite reliant on this particular habitat. Tigers, wild dogs, a lot of smaller species from birds in terms of woodpeckers, which are highly reliant on the strong timber, a number of other species. And one of the most interesting things that I have noticed, especially because I live in Kanha National Park, which is dominantly a sal forest, in the monsoons, the number of mushrooms that pop up is absolutely incredible. And this actually is quite a telltale sign that there is definitely some networks, like fungal networks underground, which actually keep the Sal forest as a community sort of linked to each other. So it is an absolutely fascinating forest to be in and to sort of get to experience in India. Okay, so moving on to the second one that I'll be talking about, a very, very different landscape. And now we are actually moving to the western part of India. So these trees are called dhok or Anathias pendula. They also have a common name called the button tree. And they actually grow again in pure stands and very, very specifically in the Aravalli Hills, which are one of India's oldest mountain ranges. So our NATAP trip of the Tiger Quest, which is in Ranthambore National Park, is actually the prime location where you get to see the dhok trees in like absolute glory. And dhok trees are found in the Aravallis and also a tiny patch in central India in Panna National Park. And barring that, you actually don't see them anywhere else. Hey, can you
Faiza?
hear me?
We hear you now.
Oh, okay.
Okay, great.
Where should I go back a little? Was it a long while that you couldn't hear me, or?
It was just about a minute or two. You were on this slide. Um, so go ahead and pop that back into full screen and we can get going.
Awesome. Okay, sorry about that. So,
Thanks.
as I was talking about dhok trees, so what is most fascinating about them is that they are quite a mystery to us. And the very fact that they grow in places where nothing else really grows, and they grow well. I mean, you can see, like in this photograph, of course, there are two species of trees here. The dhok is the shorter shrub-like sort of undergrowth almost, and the individual taller trees is another species called the frankincense tree. But essentially, this tree can grow in areas which are completely rocky and have very little soil and almost negligible amounts of water. And that's what makes it so special. And it's still quite a mystery to us as to how they are able to do this when a lot of other trees don't, because it's not like their roots go very deep down. It's not like I mean, there's a lot of adaptations that they have which aren't sort of telltale signs that give us these answers, except there's one particular thing this tree does, which is um, a very unique adaptation. So, as you can see, the top right corner photograph has a little red colored seed. So those are what the seeds and the fruits of of the dhok tree look like. Now, because of such little moisture in these habitats, the dhok tree basically it finds it hard to germinate in such dry conditions. But instead, it has actually adapted itself to do something interesting where they basically duplicate themselves in the sense that they are clonal forests. And this is something which is again very understudied and underrepresented in India. In other parts of the world, we know of this sort of behavior in a lot of other species. For instance, the aspen in the US, which one of the it's basically considered as one organism, what looks like multiple trees, but are actually all part of the same DNA. And so dhok does a very similar thing. So, for example, this entire patch of forest, which is on the top left, that can be considered as an entire, like one particular organism rather than many different trees. And this is basically its adaptation to grow so prolifically in such hostile environments. What is also interesting about dhok is that it does really well in areas which are grazed. So, for example, the one which is the photo on the top middle, where you can see all these rocks and a lot of green sort of foliage on the ground. Now, this is also a dhok tree. So you can see how differently they grow from being grazed by livestock, from by goats and cows and deer, and over time it still survives in such conditions, but grows in these stubby, almost like a layer on the ground. Um, what's stunning to see for dhok is how different the seasonal changes are. So as you can see in the top and the bottom photo on the left, the dhok requires literally a day or two of rainfall and the new leaves will just sprout. So it's stunning to see in the monsoon season how the landscape completely transforms. And come say November, December, as the winter approaches, the leaves actually turn like a gorgeous crimson purple color, and the entire landscape turns this stunning purple shade. So those of you who might have been on the quest trips in winter, you would have seen how stunning the dhok forests look, in that landscape in Ranthambore. Um, so yeah, those are some of the really fascinating sort of features about dhok. It also is considered as one of the hardest wood around. And yeah, like a beautiful photo of course, the apex predator that is found in this landscape. And the reason I've chosen this photo is also because in the background you can clearly see that almost like a monoculture of dhok, like a blanket of dhok growing in a beautiful sort of setting in Ranthambore National Park. So this habitat is also sort of home to a lot of species, which for example, the tiger, of course, sambar, a lot of more dry area species, sloth bear, so it is a very interesting habitat niche. Okay, so we now move on to the eastern part of India. From the west in Rajasthan, we have gone all the way to the east to a state called Assam. And this particular habitat, I won't really be focusing so much on, say, specific species of plants. I'm actually going to be talking more about the general landscape over here. Now, the floodplains of Kaziranga. Now, Kaziranga as a national park, of course, is most famous for the one-horn rhinoceros, and it's possibly one of the best conservation stories in the world, where they have been able to revive the rhino numbers going from almost double digits to now touching 3,000. In fact, it's reached its carrying capacity of rhinos, and they're actually relocating them to neighboring parks. So going into the geography of this national park and what is so fascinating. Now, as you can see in this map, almost the entire national park has the river Brahmaputra flowing through it, and which is why I call it's known as the floodplains of this beautiful massive river. And say come monsoon months, so from May onwards, all the many tributaries that join the Brahmaputra are full of water, and almost two-thirds of the national park is actually underwater and is flooded. So this really determines the entire ecosystem, and everything in this national park is sort of designed and planned around this entire flooding event. So in this map again, you can see if you can see the key it says tall grass, short grass. So you can see that this entire lower half of the map is largely grassland. So Kaziranga has a combination of different sort of kinds of grasses, and the major one is this tall grass that you can see called the elephant grass, and of course a lot of other species as well. It also has patches of wooded areas, but every possible plant, tree, grass species that grows here is sort of adapted to be underwater for almost 4 months of the year. So that in itself is quite fascinating. So this national park is most well known, for the species that have adapted to these situations. So it's one of the best places to see a lot of the larger grazers. So from the Asiatic elephants to the rhinos, of course, to the Barasingha, the swamp deer, the hog deer. So there's a huge number of herbivores which are reliant on this particular ecosystem. So going back to the whole flooding period of time in Kaziranga, what's amazing is that when the river does flood, all of these animals are actually adapted to mi- carry out a short migration where they move to higher areas. So there's this hill range close to Kaziranga called the Karbi Anglong Hills, and these mammals actually, traverse through the water and go up to higher ground. Now, in recent years, of course, this has become challenging for the animals because of a lot of construction that has come up in their routes, and roads and highways. But at the same time, this is a process that an annual sort of process that they are used to. And that's what makes this habitat so incredibly fascinating, especially as a grassland, because I feel like most of through the world we are generally more familiar with more temperate grassland areas or drier grassland areas, and these kind of floodplains are not so well studied. And in fact, the conservation management sort of methods are also still being figured out. And there are so currently every year there's a burning cycle that happens in Kaziranga where they actually burn a whole bunch of grass so that there's new regeneration of new grass. And this is basically aimed largely for a lot of the larger mammals, from the rhinos to the elephants, so that they have enough grass regrowth. And also this sort of stops a lot of the trees from taking over. But at the same time, there are a lot of smaller mammals, birds, which get affected by this. So I feel like we are still understanding this particular ecosystem and habitat, and how to conserve it. This is a fabulous sighting that happened in Kaziranga, but Kaziranga does have one of the highest populations of tigers in the country, and that's quite sort of obvious considering the number of herbivores that are found there. So it's only natural for it to have so many tigers. But as you can see, the trees that are growing on the around the pathway. This is a beautiful tree called Lagostomia speciosa, and when it flowers, it has the most stunning purple flowers. So this entire avenue looks like this brightly, sort of lit up purple, pathway. And seeing mammals and seeing wildlife walk through this is quite stunning as well. Okay, so now moving on to the fourth region, the cold desert of the Trans Himalayas. So this is an area where I do end up spending a lot of my time through the winter for, on the snow leopard trips. And like I showed you in the map right at the start, the Trans Himalayas, this particular area that I'll be talking about is called Ladakh. It's the northernmost part of India, and it's basically right behind, it's in the rain shadow of the Himalayas. So it doesn't receive much rain at all. In fact, I mean, a few sort of like a very negligible amount through the year. And most of the winter months, there is a lot of snow here. So the predominant sort of source of water here is snow. Now, the vegetation here is really interesting and absolutely sort of adapted so closely to these harsh conditions. Uh, in this photo over here, there's a male ibex walking through what is a stream that is frozen right now in the winter. But as you can see, the vegetation around it is typical of this sort of cold desert in the Trans Himalayas. So again, a map to show you the location of Ladakh, where um, the area that we'll be talking about. So this is almost like an extension of the Tibetan plateau, basically, that is, in within India. And so this kind of sort of dry, cold conditions. So the plants here have had to sort of adapt to a combination of s- cold winds, high sun, like extremely strong sunlight, a lot of snow, and very little moisture. And this has basically caused it to have certain adaptations, such as I'll show you a photo, such as sort of forming almost like these cushion-like shapes or like mat-like formations, and this keeps it close together and it kind of reduces its surface area almost. A lot of the leaves, as you'll see, are very small, very spiky. This particular, so the two plants that you can see on the left side, the top one, which has the orange berries, is known as the sea buckthorn tree or bush. It's also found in parts of Europe and, in fact, in a lot, some of the coastal areas in Europe. Um, and this particular plant is native to Ladakh and has very tiny leaves and a lot of thorns, and it's a favorite for a lot of birds. But this too, being a considering it's a tree, you will always see it growing around water or streams. You won't see it growing randomly on, a cliffside or on a mountain, um, without water nearby. The plant below it, in Ladakh, we call it longze, and it has a very long and complicated scientific name, which I'm forgetting right now. But this itself forms these, almost like these huge red cushions, very sharp, spiky cushions. And in summers, this transforms into a beautiful green cushion-like plant. The plant in the middle over here, which is basically the tree that you can see with the yak standing in front of it. Now, that is a juniper tree, which as well is another native tree to Ladakh. Now, Ladakh, like I said, being a cold desert, doesn't have too many tree species. In fact, it probably has three tree species which are native to the area. But interestingly, when you do visit, and if you have already visited this, done the snow leopard trip, you'll realize you'll see a lot of trees growing along the rivers, along the streets, and these are predominantly two species that grow here. Called one is a willow and one is a poplar. And as much as they've become a very popular species in Ladakh, they're actually introduced. But they were introduced, almost, I think, it's been a few centuries now. So they've become naturalized and a huge part of the architecture and the general sort of usage, and people depend on that in a big way. But the native, natural sort of flora that grows here is shrubs, flowers, grasses, nothing that requires too much water. Um, some of the other adaptations, other than that cushion-like shape, is also the very fact that many of the plants here are, they call ephemerals or annuals. So this means that they are actually in a completely dormant state through most of winter and spring, and it's only once the snow melts completely and they have enough water for, say, 2 months or 3 months of the year, they will spring up and have the most beautiful flowers. Like most of these annuals have extremely stunning flowers. This also sort of maximizes their pollination and their reproduction. So because they have such a short time period, they have to make the most of that. And you'll see a lot of bee species, a lot of insects that actually pollinate these flowers as well in the summer months in the cold desert. So that again is a another adaptation that the flora has of this area. Um, this particular photo, I had to put it because I had these two guests who were extremely enthusiastic about the plants, and I feel so happy when that happens because, like I said at the start, plants are something which most people sort of just look past or don't really give so much attention to. So I was extremely enthusiastic showing them all the different plants that you could see in the winter months in Ladakh. So again, in this photo, you notice how the way these shrubs are growing in this very sort of like tight patches, and these actually create the most incredible habitats for most of the wildlife in Ladakh. So this particular fox, the Himalayan fox, you will often see them living inside these massive bushes of various species. And what they are actually going for inside them are the pikas or the marmots, which are small mammals which actually again seek shelter and live inside these. So it's very common for us to look for wildlife in these, small sort of vegetation niches, which are often around water bodies, especially. Another adaptation that, say, the ungulates have taken in Ladakh is the very fact that they live on very little through the winter. So, as you saw previously, and as I mentioned, most plants in the winter months go dormant and there is nothing on them. They are just sort of almost like twigs, which with roots which are very deep rooted, but there's not much on them. So the herbivores in Ladakh have actually designed or actually have evolved to sort of survive in winter without needing to eat as much. And they have reserves from the summer months that last them through the winter. They don't move too much, so their metabolism slows down, hugely. And it's quite amazing to see such large animals eat and feed on almost, negligible amounts of vegetation through that entire time. So in general, this habitat again, the reason I chose this was because of how specific this niche is. And uh, it just shows you how important it is to look at wildlife destinations, through this lens, and it opens up another world. And it's so interesting to see how, all of these mammals, birds are sort of adapted to I mean, mammals, birds, and also the plants, how they've adapted to the conditions, the hostile conditions that are found here. So yeah, that pretty much sums it up. This is just a beautiful photo of a snow leopard, and the reason I've sort of, I think you might have noticed at the end of every habitat, I've sort of have put a photo of a big cat, and the truth is that that is sort of signifying a chain, right? Of how, we are talking about the plants, we're talking about the basic sort of ecology around the vegetation, but how all of that sort of is dependent in terms of leading up to the apex predators and how they are, the sort of chain that leads to the coexistence of all of these species. Um, so yeah, this was pretty much a description of the habitats. Have I finished quite early, or do I have some time left?
Well, you absolutely have some time if you have more to talk about. Otherwise, we can dive into the questions. If our guests have any questions they'd like to ask, they can submit them in the question field in your control panel on the upper right corner. So we do have a question here.
Mhm.
Are the pikas that live in the shrubs in Ladakh the same or similar to the ones in Alaska or Northwest America?
So let me go back to the photo. So in India itself, we have over almost like 8 to 10 species of pikas, and each of them are actually quite specifically adapted to certain habitats. So the specific pika that actually lives in this specific habitat, it's called the Nubra pika. They only live in these bushes. Whereas if you see the pikas that are found in, say, the areas where our lodges, where the Nat have lodges for snow leopards in more rocky areas, that is a different species. So, of course, the general it is the same pika which is found all over the world, but in terms of the specific species, each one is actually quite almost sort of adapted to very specific habitat niches. So, yeah, overall the same, but also different. Yes.
Great, thank you so much. And again, if you do have some questions, feel free to pop them into the question field in your control panel. Um, so, what other continents have the sal trees, and do other continents have the dock trees?
So, interestingly, no other continent has the sal or the dhok tree. So, they are two trees which are actually endemic to Asia. The dhok trees are actually endemic to India. The sal trees are found in, say, Myanmar and some of the neighboring countries, but Myanmar, Nepal, Burma, Bhutan. But overall, that is the extent of it. So, that makes them that much more special.
Great, thank you so much. Um, well, it looks like that's the last question that we do have right now. Unless we have any other questions come up, I'd like to throw it back to you for any closing comments you may have.
So, um, I would just like to say that, in the sense that I feel like it's so important to, like I mentioned earlier, to sort of look at these, on any sort of wildlife trip that you visit. It's so nice to look at wildlife through a lens of understanding the plants as well. And I do understand it's often important for someone to introduce it to you in a easy way as well, because it does um, most botany plant books are like the most boring, uh, not the sort of more recent ones, but in general they have a reputation for being extremely verbose and have a lot of writing and very few pictures, and it can tend to be quite boring. But it's quite a fascinating world to enter, and there's so much to see, there's so much. It's quite, for me it's a challenge to identify, you, so it's quite important. And also I want to say that one of the reasons I've chosen, say, four of these habitat niches, it just shows you how fragile each one is because of how specific the species that grow there are. I mean, it just tells you that these microhabitats need to be conserved that much more because of how dependent very specific species are on these plants as well. So yeah, I hope something like this would make you, when you do come to India, or you know, sort of enter these landscapes looking at it from this lens. It would be nice for that to happen.
Well, Faiza, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like
Thank
to
you.
thank, oh, it was my pleasure. And we'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. So if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at 800-543-8917, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us Monday for our next daily dose of nature. You can check out next week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude today's webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.